Morning, everyone. My name is Jake Marcinko. I'm a product manager for the council, and I'm here today to discuss the value proposition of the PCI software security framework. But I want to do it a little differently than some of the other sessions have been today. I want this to be a little bit more fun and interactive. But before we get into today's simulation, something you should know about me. I am a huge fan of TV crime dramas. In fact, I'm a little embarrassed about the number of crime dramas that I've watched. Now, I'm based in North America, so most of these shows that you'll see initially are all pretty popular within North America, but it all started back in the early 1990s with shows like Law & Order, NYPD Blue, NCIS, the original CSI. Then there was CSI Miami, which stands for Crime Scene Investigation, CSI New York, and CSI Cyber. But thanks to streaming platforms like Netflix and Amazon Prime and others, I've been able to expand my appreciation for TV crime dramas into UK-based shows like Prime Suspect, Inspector Morse, his protege, Inspector Lewis, Endeavour, shows like Shetland, Annika, and even Broadchurch. But again, geographical boundaries haven't limited my appreciation for TV crime dramas. I've even gotten into watching the whole Nordic noir series, Icelandic language-based TV shows like Trapped and the Valhalla Murders. I've also even gotten into French language shows like Alex Hugo and Profilage. And again, thanks to Netflix, I've even started to expand into the K-drama or Korean language shows like Voice and Stranger. So given my appreciation for TV crime dramas, I thought it would be a fun way to demonstrate the value of the PCI software security framework, as if we were all part of a cheesy crime TV show. So everyone, welcome to CSI PCI. So I'll be your host today as we collectively work to solve a fictitious cybercrime incident based on real-world events. Now, the rules of today's game are simple. I'm going to present the details of an attack scenario based on real-world cyber attacks, and you're going to help me to determine who carried out the attack and how they accomplished it. Now, there are 5 potential suspects and 5 suspected attack methods. And then what we'll do is we'll use a Slido poll to where you'll interact and let me know who you think carried out the attack and how they did this. Does that sound good for everyone? All right, let's go. Okay, everyone, we have a code red situation. This is a full-scale incident. No one can leave the room until we can determine what happened here. So here's what we know so far about this incident. We have customers that are reporting that the latest software auto update is triggering a high degree of anti-malware alerts in their environments. Now, the malware appears to be communicating with servers that were assigned to a domain that was registered just 10 days ago. And all communications between the malware and the servers are encrypted, so we have no visibility into those communications. Now, the software in question is a client-side app that has an API services backend. All the software source code is stored in the cloud in GitHub Enterprise, and we use orchestration tools like Jenkins to compile, sign, and then deploy the code to a secure update server. And finally, code signing keys or certificates are all stored in a secure HSM. So how was the malware inserted into the software? So here's the evidence I'm going to present to you. This is what we've collected so far. We know that we've had critical CVE alerts for 2 third-party libraries embedded in the client-side code. We also have a client-side software dependency on a different third-party library that has been deprecated. and the client-side code contains a maliciously altered third-party library. So all of this seems to imply that one or more third-party libraries was used as the primary mode of compromise for the software. However, we have some other evidence we've collected that points elsewhere. We have an exposed critical vulnerability in a server-side code for an API endpoint. We have evidence from a previous API source code review that confirms the API processes unsanitized user input. And then we have previous pen test evidence that confirms the API endpoint may not perform a proper authorization check before it returns sensitive data. So all of this seems to imply that a vulnerable API endpoint was the main point of compromise. But again, we have additional evidence that points elsewhere. We have evidence of code signing certificates being copied to network shares for convenience purposes, so taken out of the secure HSM and posted on an internal network share. We have system monitoring logs that show suspicious signing activity. And then we have external reports indicating that the malware was signed with a company code signing certificate. All of this seems to imply that a compromised code signing certificate was the primary attack vector. But then we have we've intercepted numerous phishing emails that have been targeting DevOps personnel. We have network logs that show several DevOps accounts with repeated failed login attempts followed by a success. And then we have multiple password reset attempts for a handful of DevOps accounts. So all of this suggests stolen admin credentials as the main point of attack. And then the last series of evidence that we've collected, we have build logs showing logins from unfamiliar IP addresses at really odd hours of the day. We know that multi-factor authentication was turned off for certain build server accounts. And finally, we have build logs that are showing unusual child processes, such as encoded PowerShell commands. And all this suggests that the build server was the primary point of compromise. So this is all the evidence we have so far in terms of the primary attack method. So here's your opportunity for the Slido poll. Should be a QR code popping up momentarily. Let me know who you think or what you think was the primary attack method. Was it an insecure third-party library that was the primary attack method, an insecure API, a compromised code signing certificate, stolen credentials, or a compromised build server? And are people able to see? Oh, there's the QR code. So we'll give folks a second here to. All right. So far, this is interesting. Started out with we'll give it another second here. Seems like we have one clear leader. All right, I think we have it. Insecure third-party library. Let's see if we can actually rule out some attack vectors. So insecure third-party client libraries definitely can be dangerous, but they are usually exploited at runtime. It would be difficult to achieve the same scale using runtime exploits on client-side code. And while it could be a possible vector for future targeted attacks, the evidence seems to point to some other root cause. So that most likely rules out an insecure client-side library. But what other attack vectors can we rule out? Insecure APIs are also typically exploited at runtime. And while they may be used to execute arbitrary code, it would make for an impractical attack at this scale. So that rules out an insecure API. And while obviously factors in this attack, neither a compromised code signing certificate nor stolen DevOps credentials would themselves be the primary cause of malware distributed at this scale. So therefore, the most likely main point of compromise is a compromised build server. So it seems the attackers were able to compromise legitimate user credentials to the environment and build server, The methods used to obtain the credentials was a targeted phishing attack. Once the attackers had access to the build server, they could pretty much do anything they wanted to the build process. But who would carry out such an attack and why? Let's look at that. So from a potential attacker perspective, here's what we know. We have git diffs showing dependencies pushed to the main branch without pull requests or evidence of code reviews. We have commits pushed from inactive and on-leave DevOps accounts, so accounts that, that are dormant for some reason. And we have identity and access management servers that indicate broad admin rights were recently granted to dormant DevOps accounts. So all of this hints at a potential insider threat or inside job. So that's our first suspect. But then we have disk images from the build server that contain known ransomware code fragments in the same directory as the malware. There's the presence of code snippets from ransomware note templates in the malware as well. And again, as we stated at the beginning here, we have outbound traffic that's been traced to a domain that was registered just 10 days ago. So all of this resembles common ransomware gang behavior. But then we have a well-crafted phishing email campaign that's targeting DevOps team members that was recently received and identified last week. We have malware signatures that overlap with known APT toolkits. And then the malware beaconing matches suspected nation-state infrastructure. So the sophistication of this attack suggests a nation-state actor. But then we have known hacktivist social media and forum accounts that are claiming responsibility for the attack. We've identified ideological slogans in the malware fragments. And there's even defacement functionality included in the malware itself. So this suggests a hacktivist or hacktivism organization as the likely culprit. And then finally, we have anonymous leaks to the press about undisclosed software vulnerabilities. This is an intentional effort to damage the company's reputation. We have checksums of several third-party components that don't match what was actually approved by our build process. And we have code snippets from the build server with intentional performance degradation functionality, things like intentional memory leaks or backdoors. So all of this seems to indicate a corporate saboteur. So again, this is the evidence we've collected thus far about who the attacker may be. Let's bring up the Slido poll and see what the group thinks about who is the most likely attacker. So insider threat seems to be leading the pack. We'll give it another second here. All right, I think we've stabilized. All right, so insider threat, let's see. Are there any suspects we could easily rule out? Well, again, there's evidence of attempts to damage the company's, or the organization's reputation, again, indicating a potential corporate saboteur. However, the degree of sophistication, stealthiness, and the scale of this attack imply other motivations besides sabotage. So that likely rules that out. And additionally, the scale and sophistication also seems to be implausible for an insider. So that likely rules out an insider threat. That leaves us really with three types of organizations, all of which possess the degree of sophistication exhibited in this attack. However, the presence of both the presence of both ransomware and ideological code snippets seems a little suspicious to me. Could that potentially be a false flag? And the targeted, sophisticated nature of the phishing campaign, along with the malware traffic patterns, points to one type of organization in particular, and that is a nation-state actor. So why would a nation-state want to carry out an attack like this? Well, it's really tough to interpret what the motivation of a nation-state actor might be. However, one can interpret from the evidence that the attacked organization may not be the primary target. It's possible that the intent of the attack is to poison the software supply chain upstream from the intended target or targets. And that would be similar to the SolarWinds and 3CX attacks in 2020 and 2023, respectively. So now that we've gone through we've identified who the attacker was and how they did this, what are you doing to protect your organization from attacks and attackers such as these? Now, many people in the room are most likely using PCI DSS controls to help protect their environments. But what are you doing to protect your software products and your software supply chain? There aren't really any requirements in DSS that cover those issues. And how are you demonstrating your software security capabilities to your customers and your partners? That is what the PCI Software Security Framework is for. Now, there are two components to the PCI Software Security Framework. There's the Secure Software Standard, and then there's the Secure Software Lifecycle Standard. Now, the Secure Software Standard defines requirements for ensuring that the software sufficiently protects sensitive software assets, so data, code, certificates, keys, etc. And then the Secure Software Lifecycle Standard defines requirements for ensuring that software vendors' SDLC processes incorporate appropriate security practices. But there's also validation programs and listings that make up the broader PCI Software Security Framework. And that's what really differentiates us, what I think differentiates us from other standards and other frameworks, is the assessment program and listing programs. So what are our listings? Well, in many ways, our listings are kind of like a nutritional label for software products and the SDLC practices of their vendors or producers. It provides information about what was evaluated, the scope of the assessment, and the high-level assessment results. Stakeholders can use this information to make informed business decisions about the security of those products and their vendors that they're looking to purchase or utilize. And then when combined with PCI DSS controls, our validation programs provide even greater assurance and insight. And we're continuing to make improvements in version 2.0 of the Software Security Framework, which we're expecting to publish the updates to the Secure Software Standard and the Secure SLC Standard and the accompanying program documentation either at the end of this year or at the beginning of next year. Now, some of the changes in the version 2.0 release of the Software Security Framework include further clarifying the concept of sensitive assets. So what are sensitive software assets? As I mentioned, it could be data, it could be functionality, it could be code. And the concept of sensitive assets is really foundational for the Software Security Framework. We're also providing additional documentation to clarify other important terms and demonstrate how all of these concepts fit together. But we're also updating and revamping our listing management process to better accommodate software listing and listing updates. We're reintroducing the concept of wildcarding, which has existed in other programs like PTS for a long time. And we're getting rid of the mandatory requirement for full software assessments whenever there's a high-impact change. In fact, we're replacing the entire high-impact, low-impact nomenclature and replacing it with what we call Tier 1 and Tier 2 Delta assessments. And then we're expanding the type of Delta assessments that can be performed by Secure SLC qualified vendors. And then we're also looking at how we could leverage the Secure Software Standard and Secure Software Lifecycle Standard and other PCI SSE standards and programs, for example, an MPOC and then point-to-point encryption. So if you'd like to learn more about the Software Security Framework and how you might benefit from that, you can reach out to me via the email on the screen, or you can come up to me during the rest of the CM today. I'm happy to talk to you about it, and we can talk about, again, how it could benefit your organization. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the simulation today. I appreciate your time. Thank you.